Welcome to the EchoCast, a podcast about video game news, speculation, rumors, and reviews. I'm your host, Morgan, aka Bond Diesel, and this week we'll be covering Baldur's Gate 3's huge success, Switch 2 rumors are heating up, my current game of the year, and much, much more. A few things before we get started. Subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform, and on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and comment with your thoughts, questions for next week, or to just say hello. A special thank you to all of my patrons, including producer level patrons, Hassan and Horseman, supporter level patrons, PK, The Dawn, Cage Nephilim, and Neuronix, as well as viewer level patron, Zinra. If you're interested in supporting this podcast and getting ad-free episodes for as little as $1 per month, please check out patreon.com/BondDiesel. Gaming news, let's get into it. This week we have 8 topics. Topic number 1, Baldur's Gate 3 gets its full release. So this week it was, I believe, on Thursday. I'm recording this on Saturday. Baldur's Gate 3, made by Larian Studios, finally released after 3 years of early access. And it's doing pretty good. So its Metacritic score, as of the time I recorded this, was 94. The caveat being that there's only 4 reviews, and all 4 of the publications I saw I've never heard of before. So it seems to track though. I believe the user score is 9.3, and I've not seen anyone serious say they think it's like a bad game. So, well, let's get into that in a minute. First, they've been setting records. So when I typed up this script, they had gone over 600,000 concurrent players on Steam, which put them, I think, at like 9th or 10th on that list of like all time, the most players at one time. And right before I recorded, I checked again, and they had crossed 700,000 peak players. That is real good. That is, if you ever look at the all-time top, there's games like Dota and Counter-Strike and Apex Legends and stuff, which I believe it actually just passed Apex Legends, mostly free-to-play games that outperform it. But, this is big. And like the numbers are going to drop. Like, there's a lot of excitement right now. It's completely deserved. It's a really great game. Those numbers are going to drop, but they're going to stay pretty good, I think. Because you have to keep in mind, all of the games on the top played list are mostly free-to-play shooters, competitive shooters of some capacity. So, this isn't going to hold these numbers forever. That's just not realistic. But that doesn't matter because it's a moment that's fun to be a part of. My thoughts on it are really complicated. I really like this game. My complication with it is that one of the core parts of the game, the combat, I don't like. Partially because I don't understand it, partially because I'm impatient. It's all me reasons, but it's just not my preference. I don't like turn-based combat, and I've given it goes, and I've liked it in some aspects, the recent games I've checked out that are turn-based, like, I appreciate it. I just can't get into it, like Gears Tactics and stuff like that. That was years ago, but I've always found it to be interesting. I'm a big dumb meathead. I love my American football. I love my shooter games. I love, like instant action, and the turn-based thing I just don't have the brain for it. It's just not who I am. That said, despite the fact that I don't like the combat, I'm learning to tolerate it. I'm getting better at it. I'm learning more about it. I don't know anything about Dungeons and Dragons. I don't know. That is a world. The most I know about Dungeons and Dragons is from Stranger Things, if I have to be straight up, so it's barely nothing. It's barely anything. And the thing about it is that's fine, because I don't know if I'll finish this game. Apparently it's over at least 100 hours to complete the main story. That's not counting all of the side questing and stuff. I don't know if I'm in it for that long haul. This is basically my game until Starfield comes out. And when the Tarkov wipe happens, I'll be splitting time a little bit. But what I love about this game is that even though I don't like one of the major parts of it, like maybe the biggest aspect of the game, I enjoy the exploration. I think the graphics look really nice. I think it's a nice looking game. It's not like ultra modern, like the best looking game I've ever seen, but it's pretty good. Especially the animations and stuff, the facial animations of even like the animals, because like my character can talk to animals. And then the druids who can turn into animals, they did something. They did their animation is so good and expressive, and it feels pretty natural. It doesn't have the Bethesda kind of, even though I appreciate kind of the way their games look and dialogue and stuff, it's not very natural, right? This does a great job with it. It looks so good. The writing and the voice acting performances, even the voice acting performances of like the random NPC kid you'll talk to once, and the voice acting of that, and the writing of it, all the way to your companions who you talk to all the time. They're so good. They're just so good. They're very natural. They're funny. They're serious. They're scary. It runs the whole gamut. The writing and the voice and the delivery of the lines are so good. All the voice actors, especially of the main characters and the main companions and stuff. So far, I've played like 12 hours, I think, but that's been 2 characters. That was probably about 8 hours that I've deleted, and I'm not doing them anymore. And then the one I just restarted last night. So I'm not really that far in, but it doesn't matter. I know how I feel, right? Obviously I can't comment on like the end of the game or anything yet, but I will eventually, hopefully. But like, it's not just the writing and the delivery of the voice actors. It's just the way that you can see friendships and relationships and rivalries are spawning and branching off from these dialogue trees. And in those 3 playthroughs I've had, even though I deleted the first 2, this third character I've made, I'm getting like way different results, even in just the first couple hours of the game, which then just makes me realize that the branching narrative here must just be insane. Like this must be a game that you could literally play 50 times and get genuinely unique playthroughs. Where, I mean, if you know me and you've been paying attention to my content, I've played the Mass Effect trilogy since the Legendary Edition came out in 2021. I've now played it probably 20 times through, all the way, on PC and Xbox, and even on my current playthrough I'm on, the 19th or 20th playthrough, I'm still catching some unique dialogue here and there that I've never seen before. But it's the game's playing out the same way every time, for the most part. And this isn't like that. And I'm not saying one's better or worse. I can play the entire trilogy of Mass Effect in like half the time it's going to take to do one playthrough of this game. And they're just different games, right? But it's just the way that it's really cool. I love the interactions and the exploration and the trippy stuff you roll up on, and the weird, crazy sandbox stuff that you have access to when it comes to environmental storytelling, when using the environment during combat, finding little details or saying just the right thing, or being in the right place at the right time for this event, or whatever. Just the insane amount of open worldness of this, like true open worldness of this, where you can do whatever you want and you can solve things in ways that maybe the devs didn't even consider at the time. It's so good that even though I despise one of the big parts of the game, the combat, I can't stay away. All I want to do is play this game, and it's so awesome. That's so cool. The development of this game has been interesting. I don't know exactly when it started. If it began early access about 3 years ago in 2020, I imagine they were in pre-production and even development of the game for at least 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 years before that. And so now you're looking at, this is, probably the 6th, 7th, 8th year of development of this game. And then it finally releases. And I had heard people talking about it over the last few years, especially in the last year, of people talking about how great it is. And I believe the early access only had access to Act 1. But then, there's people, I saw people talking about it who played Act 1 in early access, who have played like 300 or 400 hours of the early access, which is crazy. And it makes you realize why in so many ways the game feels so polished and everything does feel really good, because they've had 3 years of playtesting by people who paid full price for this game 3 years ago, or less. And it's something I said on Twitter. I think this game will be a Game of the Year candidate. I think there's a lot of hype right now. There's a lot of excitement. Maybe that will die down towards the end of the year. You have Tears of the Kingdom that people loved. You had Final Fantasy 16. You still have Starfield coming, which is the game I'm still the most excited about. Maybe even games like, like Spider-Man 2 or some games I don't necessarily think reach up there. Hi-Fi Rush, Resident Evil 4 Remake, Dead Space Remake. But this game, man, the hype that it's getting and the impact it's making, especially for a genre that is obviously popular, but maybe isn't like, mainstream, right? Or at least not in the sense that you think of maybe even like more traditional Western RPGs like the Dragon Ages and The Witcher and stuff like that, or the Call of Duties and the shooting games, this game may not have that appeal even after this big moment of success, but it's definitely made an impact. And I know people are going to cling to Tears. What's interesting to me is that all of the talk I've heard about Tears of the Kingdom is, some people like the story, and there's a lot of aspects of that game that I think are just fine from what I've seen. But it's the creativity and it's the mechanics of the game and it's the how solid it is, and that seems like what people really, really love about Tears of the Kingdom, and that's here too. And arguably, it seems like it's even more there's even more to it, and it looks 100 times better, and it's available to everyone, not just people who have Switches and have to use really old hardware. And there's I think it's going to be really interesting around Game of the Year time. We're going to have to wait and see what Starfield looks like too. In that it feels like a lot of the pros people speak of when they talk about Tears of the Kingdom, you can also say about Baldur's Gate 3. And some of those would actually probably maybe even lean towards Baldur's Gate when it comes to which one is subjectively better. It's obviously all subjective. We can't, these aren't objective things. Like there maybe you can't even say graphically Baldur's Gate 3 is better objectively, because there's some people who really like the way that Tears looks. When it comes to performance and you're comparing games to two very different art styles and things like that. But it doesn't matter. One of the things I said is that I think Baldur's Gate 3 has immediately shoved itself into the top 5, maybe top 3 games of the year, depending on who you talk to. That I love it, despite the fact that I can't stand the combat. I will ignore that because I want to learn more about the characters. I want to romance people. I want to learn more about the combat and get better at it, even if I don't prefer it. I want to explore this whole crazy map in this world. I want to find out more about the story of trying to get this thing out of my head and all my companions. I want to see the crazy decisions I make that seem mundane and lead to someone dying. One of the main characters in the game, in a playthrough I've deleted, I killed because they did something to me in the first 60 minutes of that playthrough, and they're on the cover. This character is one of the fully voiced, well-known voice actors. This person isn't just some random NPC. It's so cool. I know I'm kind of scattered with this because I'm struggling to keep it together, but it's a really cool game. I'm really happy it exists. And then the final thing I said in that tweet was that it's just this game, Baldur's Gate 3, has the feeling of a game that just has the most love, not just poured over it or poured into it. it's like they took gigantic cartoonish syringes and put all their love into that syringe and jammed it into this game and just pushed it all in, and then just did that over and over. Like, this game, it just has so much heart, is what I would say. Now, a conversation I've been seeing coming up, and I'll kind of wrap up this conversation with this, is I've seen a lot of like, well, every other game developer and publisher needs to take notice. This is how you do it. And that's fair. I think you've got Dragon Age Dreadwolf developers playing this game right now, being like, oh man, our game is not like this. And it doesn't need to be. Their game can be different. Dragon Age is a different kind of game. But man, they could take some inspiration, I bet. And you've got those Witcher developers, working on that next game, being like, oh man, like this, we don't do what this is doing. This is amazing. And you've got, like the next Mass Effect, and then the Fable games, and all of these big Western RPGs that are getting worked on and are going to be coming out in the next 4, 5, 6 years, especially the ones that are 4, 5, 6 years away, are probably looking at this game and playing this game, being like, oh, we got to do this. Like, we got to take some inspiration from this and that. And no one's going to recreate it. This game isn't for everyone, even though it's for a lot of people, apparently. But it's just, this is a moment where I think, like when Breath of the Wild came out, that changed game development. You saw in the years after that, especially open world games, ones that knew what they were doing, taking from that formula, not copying Breath of the Wild exactly, besides that one Ubisoft game, which was fine. It was still really good. But like, Breath of the Wild was a game that changed the way games are made, at least in that genre. And Tears of the Kingdom probably is too. But what's so wild about it is to have a game like Baldur's Gate 3 come out just a few months later that also is probably a game like that, at least for Western, RPG type games. Probably for a lot of games. I have to imagine that even that Call of Duty developer who's playing this game, even that Madden developer who's playing this game, while they can't necessarily directly take the lessons from this game and implement it into theirs, they may at least just be inspired by it. Like, man, this is how good games can be. Maybe the game I'm working on, we can do this one step further. And then that comes to that conversation of like, all of this talk about how games that come out unfinished, and we've been dealing with a lot of that recently, whether it's performance wise they come out unfinished, whether it's story wise it's kind of lackluster, whether the worlds don't have enough detail to them, or there's not enough fun to be found in some of these games. It's just that conversation is tough, because every studio, every developer, every publisher, they have different goals, right? Like, the type of game that Larian Studios made here isn't the type of game that every studio wants to make, right? Like, it's cool that they've been able to pump 8, maybe 9, maybe 10 years of time into this game. I've seen this kind of weird, kind of aura that people, that this plucky little indie studio made this game. I'm pretty sure Larian has like multiple studios all over the world. Like, this isn't some tiny developer. These guys are a full-scale AAA developer who just happens to, I think, be an indie or a self-publishing studio. So let's not, mix up the fact that this isn't some like 5-person team putting out this like insane project. This is a full-size AAA and likely well-funded studio that seems to be kind of taking more of the Rockstar approach or the Bethesda approach in games to say like, yeah, it's just going to take us. We're going to release like one game per generation. And it looks like it's paying off. Now, the unique thing here was the early access for the last 3 years, and how that seemingly helped a lot with them figuring out how to make the game better and more approachable, and honestly be kind of a 3-year marketing campaign to a point. A lot of people know about this game because it was in development for so long, and because people were able to touch it and see it evolve and develop and stuff like that. So Baldur's Gate 3, really, really, really good game. Not a game. This isn't going to get me into these type of games. if you've been around a while, you know I don't like high fantasy games. I don't like medieval setting games. I don't like turn-based games. I don't like magic and stuff. But this one got me, and that's really cool. So I think at the end of the day, though, I think Larian should be super proud. I think this game's gonna be obviously insanely successful. I just really hope people take these conversations that have been kind of almost like degrading of other games and devs and try to spin it into a positive thing, and hoping that, you know, games and devs are inspired by this game and try to take something from it that can make whatever games they're working on even better. Story number 2, we have the Nintendo Switch 2 placeholder name. Rumors are heating up pretty hard. So there were some reports by some kind of reliable, but, you know, maybe less well known or kind of not really like industry sources that the next Switch console or the next Nintendo main console will be coming out in 2024. And then VGC and some of these outlets that are concerned like more reliable or whatever, they are all kind of coming out with the same info. And it seems like it's probably going to be potentially revealed this year. I believe that Nintendo is supposed to be at PAX, I believe. I think it's PAX West. And they're already scheduled to have their own event, like in not at PAX, but adjacent. And now even more so, that seems that we could be probably looking at least like a preview of the next console, if not a full reveal and announcement of when it's coming out. If you haven't paid much attention to Nintendo over the last so many years, you may not know that the way they've been doing things is like completely the opposite of Sony and Microsoft when it comes to the console situation. They're to the point where their like headline games are getting finished and then sitting on a shelf for potentially years. The Metroid, I think it was Metroid Prime remaster, that Advance Wars game, now it got delayed for like because of the Ukraine war, at least partially. But Nintendo has this situation where their gaming pipeline is really reliable and is so flush with games that they can literally sit on games for years and just decide when they come out and release them at times that they believe are optimal for the best sales. And, you know, on the other side where you have Sony and Microsoft and all the third-party games and studios, you know, putting stuff out early after it's been delayed multiple times and just scrambling to put out games that, you know, they can kind of try to draw people to their platform with. You've got Nintendo plucking away there with an 8-year-old console that is really bad, you know, like hardware wise is outdated and underpowered and pretty mediocre. It was outdated when it released. It's a really interesting console that it's I think it's close to sold like 130 million units or something crazy. And it doesn't matter because they have good games and they put them out consistently and they appeal to everyone, you know, to every single demographic Nintendo appeals to. So, you know, this new console is going to be huge. I know that there were a lot of people, including myself, who were a little curious, and we still don't know about what this hardware is going to be. That a lot of people were worried that, you know, the Wii was such a success, and then the Wii U came out and it was a huge bomb, and then the Switch came out. And then I know a lot of people for, you know, months, if not years at this point, have been saying like, if Nintendo's smart, they're just going to make the Switch 2 and it's just going to be more powerful. It's just going to be better. It's going to be the Switch, but better. But I know that I can tell from even Nintendo fans, there's been anxiety about like, oh God, I hope they don't try to do something stupid. They, you know, come out with like a VR console or try to do something to completely change the formula from the Switch. Now, obviously, I'm expecting this sequel to have some gimmicks or maybe some unique features and such to set itself apart. But from the hardware leaks that have come out and some of the speculation from that, it seems like most people at this point are just expecting it to be just much, much more powerful hardware. Now, the most recent rumors, I believe, have been saying that they think it's going to be around the power of like a PS4 Pro or an Xbox One X. You know, that may kind of make you furrow your brow a little bit and feel like, well, that's weird. Those are old consoles. That's only as powerful as the last gen of the other consoles. But the thing you have to think about is that it's probably going to be another handheld. It's not going to be shooting for 4K graphics. And especially if it's on like a 7-8 inch screen or something, that power can do a lot with, if you're looking for maybe 1080p resolution and stuff like that. So there's also the factor in that the processor and the GPU, the graphics processor, are going to be NVIDIA. And that means that it's going to have DLSS. And if you know anything about PC stuff that's going on right now, you'll know that DLSS hardware is pretty impressive, especially in its current iteration. And what it can essentially do is take a game that's running at 30 frames, which is relatively easy for most hardware now, and basically AI generate and insert a frame between those 30 frames, each one of them, to make it look like it's 60 frames, even though the game is only running at 30. It's a pretty effective technology. And in the times I've used it in some of the games I play with my NVIDIA GPU, it's pretty impressive. It has some downsides, and if you have a discerning eye, you may be able to tell that there's something kind of funky going on with it. But overall, it's really impressive, and I think that when this hardware comes out, it's probably going to be pretty relevant from day one, just the hardware. But in the 6th, 7th, maybe 8th year of this new set of hardware, that DLSS will be able to pull some of its weight and make some of the games either still 60 frames, that it's just, typically barely get 30, or if they start putting out games that the system can hardware wise only do 20, 15, 20 FPS, it can make it look like it's at least 30 and make it playable. So I'll be really curious to how that plays out and how that is going to impact the generations going forward. It's, Nintendo has always been, especially with the Switch, been pretty happy to not get all of the third-party games that the Xbox and the PlayStation get, that they're always fighting over, right? You don't see that many of those games come out on Switch, and when you do, it's often being streamed, even though their internet services are like kind of legendarily bad. And it seems like it's, for most people, a not ideal but acceptable resolution to that. Or you see people finding ways to I think is The Witcher 3 that I think works natively on the Switch, and it's like not the worst experience ever. I think you're gonna see, at least at the beginning of this next hardware iteration for Nintendo, I think you're gonna see them be able to have a lot more of these third-party studios and have at least a little more parity for at least a little while there. So this is what I've been waiting for, to finally get a Nintendo console. I expect to get whatever this new one is, either from a little one to kind of get into gaming, or it very well could be for me quite a bit as well, or even my wife. The one big thing, and the last thing I'll say about the story, is the anxiety I've seen around this is that there's a lot of people already predicting that Nintendo is not going to make this console backwards compatible, and that the way they've been doing this with the Switch is that I think every month or every few months, some games from the old consoles get ported up to the Switch. And even though it really seems like this current gen of consoles are the ones that finally fully embrace backwards compatibility, or at least Xbox did a really good job of it with their backwards compatibility and free Xbox Series X and S upgrades from the last gen and stuff like that. Sony had some weirdness at the beginning and still does some kind of weird stuff with that, but it's mostly fine. It really, the people who I believe are reliable with this stuff have been talking pretty bluntly about that. They think there's a pretty good chance this next Nintendo console is not backwards compatible, and you're gonna have to wait for games to get ported up. So that would be wild, but people will do it. People will mumble and groan for a minute, and then they'll go buy 5 of those consoles over the next 8 years, and they'll buy all the games again, and they'll get hyped when those games get ported up. That's just the way that's the way it is. They know their market. Story number 3, people are underhyping Starfield, and that may be a good thing. So this is something I actually talked about, in that I've noticed that, and I don't know if it's because it's, people who typically be fans are excited about this, who are on, maybe PlayStation are kind of downplaying it. Whether there's just too many good games that have come out this year and people are like finding it hard to focus, or whether people are kind of, Fallout 76 wasn't very good when it released, and I think people kind of undersell Fallout 4 as well. I know it's not the most beloved game in that franchise, even though it reviewed extremely well, and it's a game I personally love. I think it's amazing. For whatever reason, Starfield seems like it's a little under the radar. Now, as much as it can be, it's a new IP from Bethesda, and it's one of their games that they're, one of the games, the game they'll release this generation, right? So I'm not saying it has no hype, but I know someone like me, like I'm giddy as all get out. Every now and then I even go back and watch, from this Xbox showcase over the summer, that, presentation they gave that showed off some of the stuff that you're going to get to do. And then most recently they had those little short stories that got posted on YouTube that I think were kind of a preview of the types of like side stories we're going to run across and stuff. Like I'm insanely hyped, and my thing is that even though I think the attention is a little underwhelming, I really do believe it's probably a good thing in the long run. I think people have high expectations even if hype is low, but I think the lack of like the 24/7 gaming news cycle constantly talking about Starfield will allow people to kind of still come into it with like a fresh mind, right? Without their expectations being too high. They should be high, but maybe not over the top. The one thing I do think is interesting, and obviously this is only a new part of this conversation, is I really wonder how this Baldur's Gate 3 release is going to impact it. It's a month out from Starfield, and so some of that hype is going to fade a little bit over the next month. But now I think people are almost expecting more from Starfield. I know I am, even though they are still very different games in most ways. I really think it's going to be interesting to look back and how Baldur's Gate's release impacted the impact of Starfield, which is funny because in a rare move, Baldur's Gate 3, its release date got moved up like a month a while ago to release and get out of Starfield's way. Which, funny enough, it may have actually had the opposite. It may end up having the opposite effect in some capacity. Now, on PlayStation 5, Baldur's Gate 3 is coming out the same day as Starfield. So Sony definitely seems to have done some maneuvering there to have some kind of counter messaging to the Starfield release to say, and now Sony's probably happy as can be right now because Starfield's going to come out, PC and Xbox players are going to be going crazy over it. But now Sony does at least say like, hey, that game that had 700,000 people playing it the day or two after release a month ago, well, it's available with us now, and it's not on Xbox. That whole saga is kind of weird. We've already talked about that. That has deepened a little bit in that it's Steam Deck compatible now, and you're telling me that they can't get it to work on the Series S. Anyways, this is about Starfield. I think it's okay that Starfield seems like it's flying in a little bit under the radar. I think that's going to change over the next couple weeks. I suspect we're about to see a bunch of more of those shorts, probably Todd Howard doing a bunch of talking, maybe some more gameplay. I know they're supposed to have some kind of feature at Gamescom, and so, which is coming up. It's about a week before the release of the game. There was some controversy with that, which they are not going to have a floor demo where you can play Starfield at Gamescom. And so obviously all of the expected people were, up in arms about that, even though they, are not fans of, are not going to be playing Starfield. They just, want something to dunk on. But I don't think Starfield's really a game you can do like a 20-minute demo of. I think it would leave a lot to be desired. I think Starfield's a game that you kind of need to dive into. And I think that it wouldn't work well as a floor demo. My last bit about Starfield is I did get contacted from Bethesda. I reached out, asked for an early access code to review it. They responded and gave me the link to the forum to request that review. I haven't heard anything yet. Supposedly there are review copies out there already, and there are people reviewing it and playing it. if I get this opportunity, I doubt I'll be able to confirm it. But hopefully I do. Obviously, this would be a really cool game to get early access to and get to have a day one review out there for, or at least a preview, or in progress thoughts video. But be on the lookout for that. Hopefully that comes through. And Jedi Survivor got some weird news this week. So we were just talking about that in the Baldur's Gate 3 story about how games come out maybe too early or unfinished, even though they're really, really good. Jedi Survivor, which is my current game of the year still. We'll see if Baldur's Gate bumps it. I can almost guarantee Starfield will, but still going to be one of my top 3 or 4 games of the year. Is coming to the last gen systems. Now, I believe at one point that was the intent, and then they changed it, and it was only coming to the Series X and S and the PlayStation 5 and obviously PC. So this is a weird announcement. Neither Sony nor Microsoft are still making their last gen consoles. Obviously, Sony has this hilariously large install base of PS4s out there, even though at least I think it's like 30 million of those are probably PlayStation 5s now. But that still leaves 60, 70 million consoles potential out there that that have owners who could want to play Jedi Survivor. And then Xbox only sold about half of the same, but that's still a lot of hardware out there that you could be shooting for that player base. This is just interesting because after the story came out, I fired up Survivor to see if they had like fully fixed up my Series X version, and it's like fine, but it still doesn't run like perfectly in the frame rate mode or the performance mode, or the quality mode or the performance mode. Both are like okay, but they're definitely not like pristine, and so like I don't know how they're going to make this work on the last gen systems, because it kind of still doesn't really work on the current gen system. So, I'm happy that there's going to be a bunch of people who haven't been able to upgrade yet, who are going to get to play this amazing game. Starfield or Jedi Survivor is really, really good, especially the story, but the gameplay is, and I've told some other people that Jedi Survivor is probably my favorite platformer ever that I've ever played. Now, I'm not a huge Mario fan, and a lot of these like classic platformer games, so take that with a grain of salt. But Jedi Survivor is such a good platforming game, and I'm really glad that there's people who are going to get to play it. I have no idea how they're going to make that work. Okay, so I'm going to take a quick break. So check out this ad from Anchor, and we will be right back. So as you heard, if you did, the ad was actually from Spotify for podcasters. My bad. Still Anchor in my own head. My next little bit here is my game of the year so far. So I've actually already talked about this. So Jedi Survivor is my current game of the year still. I love the characters. I love the story. I love the relationships there that they showed. I loved where we know there's already another game coming, and the series being developed right now. I cannot wait to see where that goes, where they left off this last one. The performance things were an issue, and I think for the greater game of the year people, that's gonna keep it off of a serious game of the year list. But I think it'll be top 5 or top 10 for most people. It's so good. Other games that are obviously up there: Diablo 4, Baldur's Gate 3. These are my favorites. I think Baldur's Gate may be sneaking into that top spot for a lot of people right now. It may even be doing it for me. Hi-Fi Rush is the little engine that game just came out too early in the year, and it's hot drop status of having no marketing before really, really hurt it. And it's such a good game. It's one of the most fun games I've ever played, both in all aspects. The gameplay's fun, the graphics are insane, the characters are so cool, the story's great. It's such a good game. And one of the things about Hi-Fi Rush that I'll forever be angry about is that they should have shadow dropped Redfall. Just been like, okay, it's out now, sorry, it's not very good. And then they should have had like a 3-month marketing campaign for Hi-Fi Rush, the way they did for Redfall. Redfall, that man, like they really messed up by not flipping their marketing strategies on those two games. Because if Redfall would have gotten hot dropped, and I think people would have been like, oh, okay, they're hot dropping this because it's not very good, whatever. And then Hi-Fi Rush would have had this really cool, and they could have even been fairly cryptic about it. But any kind of marketing push on that, I think would have made that game so much bigger because it's just so good. And then maybe let it come out in the summer or something. And then just like poop out Redfall earlier in the year and just get past it. That's not what happened. I think that's going to be Hi-Fi Rush's demise. I think Hi-Fi Rush is going to be in that top 3, that top 5, at least that top 10 for a lot and maybe most people who played it. But I just, it's not going to have the staying power. A game that I am going to name off as my indie game of the year, almost certainly. I don't consider like Baldur's Gate an indie game, even though it technically is. Planet of Lana, maybe like a indie experience or of the year or whatever. That Planet of Lana game, it was a Game Pass game for Xbox. The gameplay was good. It, not spectacular. It wasn't the best game I've ever played. The puzzles were relatively simple and easy to figure out. It's just the graphics were just so pretty, and they weren't like the most high fidelity thing ever, but they just looked really good. The aesthetic was really, really beautiful. The soundtrack of Planet of Lana is insane. The story that you're told without any words ever, purely environmentally and in other ways, is intriguing, is really cool, and it had me just wanting to play it nonstop and get to the end so I could learn more. And I still have questions. There were a couple moments. There were like probably 4 or 5 moments in that game that if you asked me for my top 50 gaming moments ever, at least maybe they'd all be on there. There's one in particular. There's this moment where you're running across the desert, and the visuals and the music, the lyrics of the music are just perfect. And this game is just so wonderful. And it's not going to win any game of the years. It's not. I understand it's not that, but man, it's so good. Planet of Lana is going to be in my top 5, which is a pretty beefy top 5 this year. Because you're talking about, like, I don't consider the Dead Space remake or Resident Evil 4 remakes, even though they were substantial, legit, full-on remakes. I just, especially this year, I just don't think you can put those games into consideration. It just isn't. It's not fair to all the new games that came out, in my opinion, and those are still great. And then for me, Starfield is incoming. Starfield is almost certainly, unless it's a complete failure, Starfield could come out and be like a 75 out of 100 for reviewers. I'm probably still gonna make it my game of the year. Like, if that game does 10% of what I'm hoping it does, it'll be my game of the year. And I bet it does more than that. Starfield is just, while Baldur's Gate 3 has kind of shown me like, wow, like this is wild what these developers were able to do with this game. Starfield is still that one that it has that first person combat, or at least that like non-turn based combat. It has this giant, world and this giant galaxy that you can explore. It's got the space sci-fi stuff. It's not a high fantasy medieval set game. It's gonna scratch my Mass Effect itch. That's not gonna get scratched by BioWare for at least 3 or 4 years. Starfield, just, I'm really excited. That's a game that I expect to end up being my game of the year, but we'll see. Now, obviously, there's games that I've left off my little list here that, most people would really be upset about. Final Fantasy 16, Tears of the Kingdom, Pikmin 4, Spider-Man 2, even the that Metroid Prime remaster. I don't have a Switch or a PlayStation. I've watched playthroughs of Final Fantasy and Tears of the Kingdom, and like those are games that I absolutely like. I understand why Tears of the Kingdom is going to sweep the awards this year. I understand why Final Fantasy 16 is probably going to pull a few of the lesser, quote unquote, smaller Game of the Year awards. Neither of those convinces me to want to buy the systems they're on to play them. And so this is like with that moment where I have to say, like, I know I'm wrong, at least like subjectively here for a lot of people. A lot of people, like, Tears of the Kingdom is gonna win most of the Game of the Year awards, as well as probably some other ones. Final Fantasy 16 is going to be up there too for probably like cinematics and writing and gameplay and stuff like that. This is just an insanely stacked year. It just is. And then you have games like Pikmin 4, which I've seen people have been really, really enjoying, and the Spider-Man 2. I don't get it for that game. That game seems not like a big step from the first one, even though the first one was so good that it wasn't even like a Game of the Year contender. And this and sequels like when Ragnarok did so well in the awards last year, and you know, sequels typically don't have that same push, and Ragnarok did, because they genuinely took, you know, the God of War 2018 and really, you know, even though it was still basically a giant DLC, they did enough to be like, yeah, that perfect game, well, we just did it a little bit better, and that was enough. I don't think that's the situation Spider-Man is in. I think Spider-Man 2 is going to come out and it's going to get a bunch of like 75 to 80s, and that's awesome. A 70 something Metascore is really good, and if it gets up into the 80s, that's even better. I just don't see Spider-Man 2 being this like 95 Metacritic, you know, darling that, you know, shuts everyone up about, you know, Starfield and Baldur's Gate 3 and, you know, Tears of the Kingdom. But maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But my Game of the Year so far is Jedi Survivor. Baldur's Gate 3 is nipping at the heels, and Starfield looms and will likely take over. The next story is that The Bear, the Hulu TV show, makes me want a Division 3 in Chicago. I made this tweet last week. I maybe I watched all of The Bear season 1 and 2 last weekend and loved it. It was so good. It was such a good show. But a big part of that is a lot of the B-roll in that game was showing just parts of Chicago. The game takes place, or the show takes place in Chicago, and it wasn't showing you like the beachfront and all the big buildings, at least not mostly. It was showing a lot of the side streets and the subways and stuff like that. And I've said this for years, but I really want the Division 3 to return to wintertime. Even though I like the summer setting of Division 2, a lot of fans preferred the winter of the first game, and I did in a lot of ways. I really liked the winter aesthetic in the first game, and while I appreciate the summer aesthetic in 2, it'd be cool to go back to the winter aesthetic, especially in this like insanely upgraded Snowdrop engine on this new hardware. Now, but hold on that. What was interesting about when I said that was a lot of people agreeing. I know some people from Chicago, and a lot of people being like, oh yeah, snow, that'd be great. It was funny that there were some people being like, there's no way Division 3 is happening, bro. They can barely get out content for Division 2. And that comment just like makes me want to just take an ice pick and just jam it into my head because it's like, it just shows such a fundamental, like, this person felt like they knew enough about the situation to say like, no, there's no way that game can happen, with the reason being that they've struggled with DLC content or with live service content for 2. But what that fundamentally does is lets you know that that person doesn't understand that the team that made Division 2 doesn't work on the game and hasn't since Warlords of New York. They are making Star Wars, the majority of them, like the vast majority of them. And the people who have been doing live service on Division 2 since Warlords of New York started off as this minuscule team that is growing a little bit, but is still a small development team for any game. And so the thought process here is that this person's like, yeah, those people, you know, the people making Division 2 right now can't make Division 3. Well, yeah, they can't. Of course they can't. You know, the Division 3, if it happens, and I think it will eventually, again, hold that thought, is going to take hundreds and maybe over 1,000 devs to make Division 3, the way that Division 2 did, and I assume Division 1 did as well. The issue is timing. And, you know, Division 2 came out fairly quickly after Division 1. Division 1 came out in 2016, I believe. and Division 2 came out in 2019, 3 years later. Well, as it stands right now, we're past 4 years since Division 2 came out, and my completely I don't know anything actually, but the things I can pick up is that they aren't even like there's no way anyone's working on Division 3 right now. In that the earliest that could happen, there could be pre-production going on from, they could be doing some pre-production on it. That wouldn't surprise me, but that's not what we think of, what the average gamer thinks of as game development, as a game in development. They think of the production. And I don't think production on Division 3 could even start until the Star Wars game comes out. The Star Wars game, we don't have a date yet. I'm assuming it's going to be first quarter of 2024, so not that far away. But it's almost certainly going to need at least some support for a while from that team. So maybe until next summer or fall. And then they would finally be able to potentially start working on Division 3. Well, if a Division 3 is what I think it's going to be, and it's potentially going to be because it's going to come out so many years after 2, potentially being like a light reboot, or at least a much bigger, a much more demanding game to make, where Division 2 was kind of like, I don't want to say lightly, but a lightly upgraded version of 1, where they added a bunch of stuff and improved a lot of stuff, but it was kind of a light upgrade. I imagine this next game would be a huge upgrade because the Snowdrop engine has advanced so much and things like that, so say they start making Division 3 in 2024. I mean, you're looking at 2027 or 8 until you get that game. And that's almost 10 years since the last one. And it's probably on the precipice of the next gen of consoles. And so maybe they wait for that. So maybe it doesn't come out for another year or two, because they wait for whatever that next, because that next bump in hardware is going to be pretty big. Or they do what a lot of games do, and they release at the end of console generation, because you have all of the lessons of how to fully utilize that current gen or the last gen of consoles. And so maybe we see it, in the current gen, but I think a Division 3 happens eventually. I think it ends up being at least a light reboot. Maybe we see it. I don't think looter shooters are going to be as popular 5 or 6 years from now as they are now. And because I think that's already waning. You see Destiny 2 struggling. You see, Division 2 have a dedicated fan base, but not being the biggest game in the world. And you don't see a lot of looter shooters coming out. You see a lot of extraction games coming out, which ironically, the Division 1 had with survival and even just the DZ mechanic many years ago. It was ahead of the game. They just didn't realize it. But I think a Division 3 happens. I really want to see it in Chicago in the winter. I think those things will happen. I don't know about Chicago, but I think we're in for a long wait. I don't. I've seen people say like, "Oh, I bet they're working on Division 3 right now, and it's going to come out in like a year or two." It's just, if you pay attention to Massive and have even just the vaguest idea of their teams, you've got a big team on Avatar. That game comes out at the end of this year, and it's supposed to be a live service game. You've got a big team on Star Wars, which will likely be it comes out, maybe some DLC, and then it's not supposed to be live service, but that's still a year away ish. You've got a team on Snowdrop, which is probably substantial because now other studios are using Snowdrop. I don't know if Ubisoft still does or if Massive still does Connect or not. I don't think they do. But then you have the team on Division 2, which sounds like it's growing, so it's a sizable team. I mean, between all of those, you're talking about probably 700 or 800 people, and as far as we know, that's about the size of their studio. I believe this Eden studio they moved into was technically designed to handle around 1,000 devs, but I assume they aren't at full capacity. And so there just really isn't room for anyone to be making Division 3 right now. Like I said, definitely chances that they're maybe doing pre-production or some early work on it. But I think it's far away. I think it's coming. And I really, if I just make a fun post about saying, man, it would be cool if they did this, You might not be looking for old dummy what's your face coming in and being like, well, actually, I don't think they're gonna do it. Maybe they won't. I could be wrong. I don't think I am. Next story, Xbox began selling replacement parts for base and elite controllers. This is just a cool little story, I think. With like the Nintendo Switch Joy-Cons and even the PlayStation, the current controller. It's not the DualSense, whatever it is, their newest controller, which people love, but also talk about how terrible the batteries are and how quickly they go bad and stuff. And even, drift and stuff on the Xbox controllers, especially the Elite, having issues. You don't see, you actively saw Nintendo pushing back on even being responsible to fix, their Joy-Con drift issues. You definitely don't see PlayStation making it easier to fix your own controllers and mostly replacing the battery on their controllers. And I don't even know if anyone owns their like Elite controller. I'm sure a lot of people do, but I don't hear anyone talk about it. And I've heard its battery is even worse than the base controller. And then even the Xbox, has its issues. Well, this development means that on the Xbox accessories store, you can buy every part of a controller, all of the innards of it. Even the PCB, even the circuit board and all of that stuff you can just buy. And if you're technically inclined enough, you can replace those things. And so like an example I have, if you're watching the video of the podcast, I have this 20th anniversary controller that if you look closely, it's got like the transparent, like kind of like the old school transparent faceplate. And it's got the rubber grips on the back, which I really like. A lot of the controllers have the rubber grips out here as well on the outside, but mine have it on the inside. That controller, if you try to buy it right now, they're the only examples I could find were on like eBay for like $200+. I wish I wouldn't have used it so much because I have used it a ton, and so it's not like a collector's item anymore. But I love that controller. If it starts to get drift, if the buttons stop working, if something goes wrong, without going to like a third party seller, I can go straight to Xbox now and fix that thing. And I probably will. That controller is my favorite controller I've ever owned. And I love this. This is the more, all of these right to repair legislation things that are happening where people are, kind of sick of companies expecting us to just throw away our tech every 3 years and replace it by paying for it. It's wasteful. It's stupid. It's overly expensive. This stuff is really good. Even if they're just doing it for a PR move, I don't care. That's awesome. This is really good for everyone, especially Elite owners who have to constantly fix those things for whatever reason. Then the final story today is the Wandering Village impression. So if you check out my YouTube, you can find a live stream replay, a VOD, where I streamed a game called The Wandering Village. It's on Xbox Game Pass. You can also buy it, I believe, on Steam and stuff like that. And the general idea is that it is a little city builder, a city management game, resource management, all that. But the twist is that the place that you're building your little settlement is on the back of this gigantic walking creature. And the way that creature behaves impacts your environment and impacts your city. And so it passes by resource nodes that if you build the right buildings, you can send people off to collect and come back. You can even use apparatuses that you can build to, tell the creature to lay down and rest, or to turn right or left at a junction, and all of these things. And it's really cool. It has a very, very cool design and aesthetic. It's very pretty. It has a really good tutorial to kind of give you all of the tools you need to know to play this game on your own. It has little story bits and stuff that pop up. It was just a really relaxing city builder game. And if that's what you're in for, if you're looking for a game to kind of kick back and enjoy like that, I highly, highly suggest The Wandering Village. And if you want to see my playthrough and have some laughs with us, and kind of see what I did with that, go to youtube.com/BondDiesel, and you can, it should be pretty high up. It should be the most recent VOD in there, and you can see what that was all about. So good game. Go check it out. We're going to move on to listener questions. If you have your own question or topic, please be sure to use the Google form questionnaire that you can find over at my Twitter. You can ask in Discord anything you want, in the YouTube comments if that's where you're watching, or you can hit me up on Twitter at Von Diesel or at the EchoCast. Yes, it's Twitter. It's not X. I will never call it that because I'm a baby. You can hit up any of those places to give me your questions or your topics or ideas for next week's show. This week we have a question from Neuronix that says, how does a game have to, how good does a game have to be to overcome your initial reservations and drag you in anyway? And does that happen very often? So this was obviously a topical question in our Discord and on my social media. I've been talking a lot about Baldur's Gate 3. And I assume this is mostly about that. This doesn't happen to me super often. I know what I'm about. I know the kind of games I enjoy. To a point, like when I played Mass Effect for the first time, I was never really into these kind of RPGs. Like those like really story heavy RPGs. I was always more of the Fallout type of guy, which is obviously a story intense franchise, but it's different than Mass Effect. They're different types of games. So Mass Effect was definitely an example of that. Obviously Baldur's Gate 3 has been an example of that. To a point, The Division was like that. I don't like looter shooters. I actually think they suck because I especially get frustrated with The Division because I think The Division has a world and a story and lore that absolutely deserves a really serious single player game to tell these stories and show us this stuff. I've always dreamed of a The Last of Us style Division game because looter shooters suck at telling stories. I know people love Destiny's stories. I guess it's sci-fi, straight to video, sci-fi channel crap in my opinion. It's so bad. The characters are so cheesy and lame. I think that looter shooters don't have to have good stories because that's not why most people are playing them. But the Division is an example of a game that I think really, it's a real bummer that it's a looter shooter to me because it's wasting. And they've done a good job of trying to put out a good story, and it has a good story, but it could be so much better in a different genre. So The Division is definitely one of those games. So some of the games I like the most ever have been the type that have kind of broken my initial reservations, but it's pretty rare. Doesn't happen a lot. And then Three Skimo asks, what are your top 3 favorite Mass Effect races? Of ones that we've actually interacted with, I like, let's see, what are my top 3? That doesn't mean I have to like them. Maybe the ones I think are like the most interesting or the most notable. So obviously number 1 for me is the Quarians. I think that their whole conflict with the Geth in Mass Effect 1 and 2, I think it kind of gets ruined in 3. But their whole deal with that and the way that they're treated by the rest of the galaxy, despite having their own history, and even, like in that game, the alien that you bring back from cryosleep from 50,000 years earlier still knows who they are. They're obviously a notable species in the history of the galaxy. I think Quarians are definitely my number 1, obviously, and they're, contain my favorite, romance in the game. The second one would probably be, I think, the Turians, because they kind of seem like one of the potential futures of humans in the way that they deal with their hierarchies and their power structures and their like kind of focus on military and stuff like that. I don't know if humans in the Mass Effect world or galaxy or reality will become that in the long term. I think they could. I think that humans and Turians always kind of reminded me of each other. Of if Turians were humans, they'd be seen as like fascist, and because they aren't humans and because they have super cool bro Garrus on their side, people kind of give them a break. But if you really think about the Turians closer, they would probably not be looked at in a very good light by a lot of people, but they got cool Garrus bro, and that makes people like them. And then my final one is, Probably the Solarians, because where so many of the species like the Asari are known for their long lifespans and being very powerful and smart, and even the humans and Quarians and Turians all having like relatively long lifespans, 100, 150 years. Well, having the Solarians be these like hyper intelligent, high strung, manipulative, creatures based on the fact that they only live for like 30 years is really interesting. Because there's conversations of like when Liara talks to Shepard in the first game, she says that humans seem high strung and impulsive and stuff. And Shepard says, well, we don't live as long as your people do, where, Asari can live over 1,000 years. So 100 years to an Asari is a long time, but it's not that long of a time for them. Whereas for humans, it's most of their life. And so Asari may see humans as being scrambling and rushing, but it's because they're working at different speeds. Well, then you break it down to Solarians, which have a infinitely smaller lifespan than Asari, and even a significantly shorter lifespan than humans. I think it explains a lot of their behaviors in the trilogy and even in Andromeda, where you just have to realize that they're only going to be around as long as it takes for humans, especially that live 150 years, to get into adulthood. Solarians are dying when humans are just becoming adults, basically. And so I find the way that they have all of the species act differently, partially based on their lifespans, is really interesting. And I think the Solarians are a good example of that. So off the top of my head, that's my top 3 list. Great questions from both of you. Like I said, if you have any of your own for future shows, please get into any of my socials or the Discord and use one of the ways that I give out to give me questions or topics or whatever for next week. And that's where we're going to wrap this baby up. So thank you so much for listening. I'm happy to get any feedback. Like I said before, any of those, the social media places or the Discord, please let me know. Hit me up if you have any. If you want to review the show, please check it out on iTunes and Spotify. You can review the show on either one of those places. I would really appreciate that. You can find me as Bond Diesel all over the internet, including Twitter, Threads, YouTube, Instagram, and over on Twitch, twitch.tv/Bond Diesel. I will be streaming more often soon, and I tend to stream at least once or twice a week right now. If you want to support my content, please check out patreon.com/Bond Diesel. You can subscribe over on Twitch, especially if you have a free Amazon Prime subscription, or you can check out my merch at the link in the description or on my Linktree link, which is also down there. That's all I have for this one. So until next time.